Ian here with Touratech USA, and around the shop we're getting pretty excited for BMW to release the F850 and F750GS bikes. Touratech in Germany is developing a full line of products for the bikes, and so we thought it would be important to go through the giant press release that BMW put out. It's about 30 pages long, telling you all the things that are new and different on the motorcycle, and we'd break that down into chunks that were a little easier to digest and let you know what's really important about the new bike. So let's start with what BMW calls the drive system on these new bikes. We're just going to call that the engine. It'll make it a lot more simple, bring it into English terms that make a little more sense. So the engine displacement is up from 798 cc's, it's gone up to 853 cc's. That's the same displacement for the 850 and the 750GS. They're doing that same thing where they have a different naming convention for different power output levels and different bike builds, but the core engine is the same. So 853 cc's. Power output is up for the F850GS to 95 horsepower. That's 10 more horsepower than the F850GS was producing throughout its entire run. The biggest difference, I think, about the new engine is that they've changed the crank layout. So this now has a 270-degree crank, whereas the previous generation bike had what was called a flat crank or 180-degree crank. The big difference there is that it's still a parallel twin, but the firing order works like what a 90-degree V-twin firing order works like. So if you've ever heard the term Big Bang engine used, what that means is the two power strokes of the two cylinders are closer together now with a longer pause as the rest of the rotations are happening before you can get back to the power stroke of those two cylinders. The important takeaways of that are it should, in theory, make a little bit better traction off-road, and two, it's going to sound like a V-twin now, which is going to be pretty awesome. BMW calls it a strong emotional sound, but it's going to sound cool. That's what's important. The compression is up. They've gone from a 12-to-1 compression to a 12.7-to-1 compression. That's just giving you more horsepower as well as helping clean up the emissions a little bit because you get a more complete burn. The important thing to note in the fine print in that press release, the bike no longer is set up to run on regular fuel. It does have NOx sensors. It can detune itself to run on regular fuel if you're traveling somewhere, but they actually have a factory option where if you're going to be riding the thing a lot in places where there isn't very good fuel, they'll actually detune the engine for the computer or the bike and make it so it's not running quite as much spark advance so it can run regular fuel. Another thing that's pretty neat is they've changed the entire oiling system to a dry sump system. And that means that the crankshaft and the rods, as they're all spinning around, they're not actually slapping into any sitting puddled oil. The cool thing about the way they did this is the oil tank is still at the bottom of the engine. So according to the press release, oil change procedures and checking the oil level should be just the same as it was on the old bike, but it's scavenging that oil from the bottom of the crankcase and it's injecting it high pressure where it needs to be to keep the engine safe. The clutch system has been changed. The BMW calls this a self-amplifying anti-hopping clutch. And what that means is they basically put a clutch like you can get on a lot of the big KTMs and a lot of the other bigger BMW bikes now where as the torque of the engine is applied to the clutch, it actually makes the clutch press together harder. So that means they can run a lot lighter springs in it, the lever pull is lighter, and also if you're getting back torque, meaning the engine is compression braking, like you just threw a bunch of aggressive downshifts on the pavement, you pop the clutch out, the clutch isn't going to lock up really hard because it has those lighter springs and the torque system isn't actually driving it together. Lastly, the engine control is now all fly-by-wire. So your throttle input is no longer connected to a cable that's opening your throttle bodies. Now your throttle input is telling the computer how much power you'd like from the bike, and the computer on the bike can decide how much power it wants to give you. That's really, really cool for bikes that have traction control and ride modes and all these different things because you can totally change the way that the motorcycle responds to your throttle input just based on how you tell the computer you want the bike to ride. The other thing that's great about that is this enables cruise control, which is now an option for the F850GS. We'll go into more detail about that later as we get into some of our further segments. So if you want to learn more, check out our website, touratech-usa.com.